Great. So cool. We'll get started, and I'll just have you introduce yourself and tell us who you are and what you do.
Sure. So my name is Robert Lustig. I am a pediatric endocrinologist, so I study hormones in children. I am a professor in pediatric endocrinology at the University of California, San Francisco. I'm also a member of the Institute for Health Policy Studies here as well.
You kind of came to this profession through a winding path. Can you just give me the brief synopsis of that?
So I'm a neuroendocrinologist, which means I study how the brain controls hormones and how hormones control the brain. I started out actually studying sex differentiation of the brain. That was sort of my first research career. At about the time that the hormone leptin was discovered, I started taking care of patients with brain tumors. And those patients would become massively obese because of the damage that either the tumor or the surgery or the radiation caused.
What year are we talking about?
About 1995. At that point, trying to understand how to take care of these patients was really paramount. We had just discovered leptin, but the obvious answer was that these neurons that would normally transduce that signal in the brain, they were dead. So we had to figure out what was downstream of that we could influence to try to help them. And what we realized was that there was a connection between the brain and the pancreas, and that insulin, the energy storage hormone, was the driver of these kids' weight gain. So we started treating these patients with a medicine to block insulin release. And lo and behold, not only did they lose weight, but they started exercising spontaneously. And so what we realized from these studies was that the behavior was actually secondary to the biochemistry, and that when you altered the biochemistry, the behavior changed. And that was a very big insight back in, I would say, 1995. Then the question became, well, most people don't have brain tumors. Most people become obese for other reasons. And of course, everybody put it on gluttony and sloth, diet and exercise. You know, a calorie is a calorie. You are what you eat. Any calorie can be part of a balanced diet. All of these mantras of the food industry. But it became very clear that that really wasn't the case, because diabetes was actually going up faster than obesity was around the world. And that took me to the question of, was there something specific in the Western diet that was driving chronic metabolic disease? And that led me to sugar. And over the last 10 years, we've elaborated the specific toxicities, that is, the detriments to health that have nothing to do with sugar's calories and nothing to do with sugar's causing weight gain, but due to the biochemistry of the molecule itself. So this is sort of my third research career as a metabolic physiologist.
There's so much there, but let's dig into the sugar portion. So beyond the calories, you've called sugar poisonous. Can you elaborate on that?
In high dose. Okay. So sugar is toxic in the sense that it proffers a specific set of biochemical alterations that are detrimental to human health, unrelated to its calories. In that respect, it is very much like alcohol. So alcohol is not dangerous because of its calories, even though it's got 7 calories per gram. Alcohol is not dangerous because it causes weight gain. In fact, a lot of alcoholics are actually quite rail thin, yet they're very sick. Alcohol is dangerous because of the molecule, because of the inherent toxicity of the molecule, because of things that alcohol does and how alcohol is metabolized in the body. So when you consume alcohol, number one, some of it goes to the brain, and obviously we celebrate that effect, but obviously if you do that chronically and long-term, you get brain damage. In addition, alcohol goes to the liver and is metabolized in the liver. The problem is that alcohol, when it's metabolized in the liver, when provided in excess, it gets turned into fat. And liver fat turns out to be the primary driver of chronic metabolic disease. So all of the diseases of alcohol, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, and brain problems, we are now seeing in children. and they don't drink alcohol. But boy, oh boy, do they consume sugar. And it turns out that the molecule in sugar that is sweet, called fructose, so sugar is made up of two molecules, glucose and fructose. Glucose is the energy of life. Every cell on the planet burns glucose for energy. Glucose is so important that if you don't consume it, your liver makes it. It makes it out of fat, it makes it out of protein, a process called gluconeogenesis. So you don't have to consume glucose to live. You have to have a glucose level to live, but your liver will make sure that that happens, whether you consume it or not, which is why, for instance, the Inuit, the Rendili, the Tokelau, the Maasai, who don't consume carbohydrate, still have a blood glucose level because your body makes it. Fructose, on the other hand, is completely vestigial to all human life, to all animal life. It is a remnant, it's a holdover from our prokaryotic or bacterial ancestry, our plant ancestry. We don't need it to live. We can live just fine without it. We do have the capacity to metabolize a limited amount of it, exactly the same way we have a limited capacity to metabolize a certain amount of alcohol. And when we go over that limit, our liver does exactly with fructose, exactly what it does with alcohol as well. And it turns it into liver fat and causes chronic metabolic disease. In addition, we are now learning that fructose gums up the workings of specific cells in the brain called glia, which feed neurons nutrients, and so also seems to have detrimental effects on the brain as well. So you can see that this is not because of calories. This is not because fructose has a caloric profile. It's because it has a biochemical profile which is very much akin to alcohol. And it is for these reasons that this molecule fructose, and therefore sugar, is toxic, unrelated to its calories. Sugar is the alcohol of the child. Children are getting the diseases of alcohol without alcohol. And the reason is because sugar is their alcohol, and we can't afford it.
That's amazing. And so let's talk about the effects that are going on. I mean, from your seat, from your profession where you're sitting, what is the state of pediatric health and well-being in the United States?
Well, we have a problem right now in medicine in general. We have two camps. We have the camp that has been in charge, shall we say, for the past 45 years. And that camp has basically come down on the side of the premise that a calorie is a calorie, that it's all about the calories, that if you're overweight, it's because you either eat too much or you exercise too little or both. And it's just that simple. And it's just a simple math problem. And anyone can do the math, which allows, shall we say, ancillary service professionals to be able to do the math as well. But this is not about math. This is about science. It's not the physics of the calorie that's in question here. It's about the biochemistry of specific foodstuffs and how they are handled by the body that is in question here. And not everybody understands that science. So what we have now is a burgeoning new nutrition, if you will, that is basically upending the previously held premises, and there's a fight, a revolution, a bloodless revolution so far, but nonetheless a revolution within the field of nutrition and health. And right now it's reached fever pitch, in part because we have now learned that the food industry and the sugar industry has actually impacted in a very negative way the knowledge and the research that went on 45 years ago that led to this premise that it's all about calories, that it's all about saturated fat, that it's all about how much you eat and how little you burn. We now know that that was a canard. We now know that that was a mistake. And so getting people to back away from something that they've believed for 45 years is not easy to do.
Is it fair to call it a mistake, or was it more like a conspiracy, or was it more like a targeted approach and an intentional misrepresentation of information?
That's a very good question. Was this, in fact, a conscious effort? And the answer is absolutely, and we have the data. My colleagues here at UCSF have actually dug up that data. A team, Kristen Carnes, who is a dentist, along with Laura Schmidt and Stan Glantz, who is the primary proponent against tobacco, have actually analyzed documents that the sugar industry, by, shall we say, happenstance, left behind. And by doing so, and by going and researching very specific collections in libraries around the country, found that indeed the sugar industry and the processed food industry have basically, shall we say, lined the pockets of specific health professionals to exonerate sugar and come down on saturated fat as the primary nutritional demon. We now understand this, and we are trying to, shall we say, re-excavate the foundation of our nutritional knowledge.
It sounds so conspiratorial that when you're telling someone this, or I'm finding from my seat as either a trainer or a health professional trying to explain this, they find it unbelievable. Are there a few key events or dates or things that you point to in particular that are, I don't know, particularly disturbing?
So, in the past, the food industry has published results of its own, and it has paid scientists to publish results that are in favor of the food industry. If you look at funding sources for nutritional studies, if a food company was the sponsor of a specific study, the odds are 7.36 times more likely that the results will be in favor of that food company. Whereas if you look at independent studies, it's 50-50. A perfectly good example of this was a paper that came out in 2013, which looked at the question, do sugared sweetened beverages promote weight gain? And there were 18 separate pieces of data in the literature. 6 sponsored by the beverage industry, and 12 that were independently funded. Turned out of the 6 sponsored by the beverage industry, 5 of those 6 said sugared sweetened beverages do not promote weight gain. Whereas if you look at the 12 that were funded independently, 10 of the 12 said yes, sugar sweetened beverages cause significant weight gain. And when you do the math and the statistics on that, it's very clear that there is inherent bias in any food industry sponsored study.
How do they get away with it?
They get away with it because they get away with it. They get away with it because they have money. People want money. As my nemesis, Dr. John Sievenpiper at the University of Toronto, said on camera in the movie Sugar Coated, scientists want to do good research, and governments are cutting back on research dollars, and scientists want to do good research, and they'll go wherever the money takes them.
As you know, we are more involved or more focused on the soda and beverage industry. Are they particularly bad, or are they worse than others?
So the question is, who's the biggest offender? And the answer is they all are, in different ways. Soda and sports drinks are sugar plus nothing else. There's nothing in a soda or a sports drink that you absolutely need. Now, the industry says, well, you need sugar to live. And it's true, you need a blood glucose to live. You do not need dietary sugar to live, as we've already discussed. So if you come back off that premise that you don't need sugar to live, the question is, what's in a soda that's required? Is there anything in a soda that is required for life? There's sugar, which is not required. There's caffeine, which is not required. There's caramel coloring, there's phosphoric acid, and there's sodium, which you get plenty in the rest of your food. So the question I've posed is sugar a food? If sugar is not a food, then soda is not a food. And if sugar is not a food, then what are we doing in terms of our processed food environment?
Have you ever been approached by them? Have they ever come after you, so to speak? Have you ever felt the heat of being the spokesman for the opposition?
Well, let's put it this way. I have been summarily discredited by the food industry. When I was in Britain, I was on for 10 minutes on the BBC, and then they turned to somebody from the Food and Drink Federation, and they said, oh, but Dr. Lustig, he's been thoroughly discredited. I'm still here. I don't believe I've been discredited. I think, they're hoping that if they say it often enough, it might be true.
If you repeat a lie most often enough, it becomes truth, right?
That's right. It becomes their truth anyway. So I think, I've certainly been the subject of that kind of defamation. On the other hand, they haven't come after me in any sort of meaningful way.
We're talking to a group of people who in 2001 read a dietary prescription and have lived by it ever since that ends with literally the words no sugar. So they know it, and a lot of these people are fit and healthy. So the question to you then is to talking to those people, why should they care? Why should they get involved? How does it impact them?
Well, if they're actually really consuming no sugar, then it doesn't personally impact them. But I'll bet you that's not true. And the reason is because sugar beverages are only 37% of the added sugar in our diet. 16% are in things that we refer to as sweet or dessert, ice cream, candy, cake. That means that 49% of the added sugar in the American diet is in foods we didn't know had it, such as salad dressing, barbecue sauce, hamburger buns, hamburger meat. When you go to a restaurant, you don't know what they put in there. So it is impacting you. It may be impacting you in ways you don't know. It's also impacting you societally because this costs money. Because there are 180,000 people who die every year because of sugar beverages, according to the article in Circulation from last year. This is costing Social Security. This is costing Medicare and Medicaid. Social Security is a Ponzi scheme, right? It's a pyramid scheme. It's a legal one, but a Ponzi scheme nonetheless. In order for Social Security to work, you have to have healthy young people at the bottom paying in so that the old infirm people can take out at the top. And there are much fewer of them than there are the young healthy people. But what happens when the young healthy people start getting sick? What happens if they're so sick that they're actually on disability? What happens if they're not paying in? What happens if they're taking out? The whole pyramid collapses. In addition, you might care because we know about something called absenteeism, but a lot of people don't know about presenteeism. Presenteeism is when people go to their job and can't do their job because they're in the bathroom peeing their brains out because of their type 2 diabetes. So you might be having to do their job for them, and that means that the employer, number one, can't fire them. Number two, they have to pay increased insurance costs on a sicker population, which means that they can't hire more people to help you do your job. So you're doing their job for them, and your employer is being prevented from being able to help you do your job. So even though you might not be sick, society is, and you care.
So what's the light at the end of the tunnel? What is the most impactful action or actions that people could take, whether they're a sugar consumer or not?
The first is educate the public. You can't have any form of societal intervention until the public is educated. However, education has never solved any substance of abuse. Did Nancy Reagan's just say no work? We have an opioid crisis. Bottom line, addictive substances are addictive. So you can have the knowledge that this addictive substance is ruining your health, your life, your family's life, and everyone around you, and you can't do a damn thing about it because it's addictive. That's the definition. Because the biochemistry is stronger than any behavioral effort that you can put up against it. That's the definition of addiction. So, education alone cannot solve this. However, you can't induce a societal intervention. You can't mobilize any sort of governmental forces to change society unless the public is educated and is willing to come along. There have been 4 cultural tectonic shifts in the last 30 years. Condoms in bathrooms, bicycle helmets and seatbelts, drunk driving, smoking in public places. 30 years ago, every single one of those was anathema. If anybody brought that up, particularly a politician, they would be laughed at and voted out of office because these were all liberty interests, things that the public had a right to do on their own. Well, guess what? Not anymore. In fact, by educating the public on each one of those, we have been able to soften the playing field, and public health has been able to get societal interventions for every single one of those. That's how public health works. So now we have the knowledge and now we have the data about sugar and its toxicity and its abuse, its ubiquity, and its negative impact on society. It meets all the criteria for regulation in some fashion. The question is, what should that regulation look like? Who should it be targeted to? How should it be rolled out? And ultimately, who stands to benefit and who stands to lose? These are all questions that have yet to be posed because we haven't gotten the public educated yet. The reason I'm appearing on this video is to educate the public. And your listeners, your viewers, because they understand this, should do the same.
By spreading word. And so the Institute for Responsible Nutrition, is that, what initiatives, for example, would you guys be pursuing to that end?
Right. So we started a nonprofit here in San Francisco 4 years ago now called the Institute for Responsible Nutrition. Online you can find it at responsiblefoods.org. We have just merged with a second nonprofit called the U.S. Healthful Food Council. And together we will be known as the Real Food Alliance. And the reason we did this is because, first of all, we had the same exact mission. That is to eradicate childhood obesity and type 2 diabetes. We had the science, but U.S. Healthful Food Council had the business model. What they do is, you know about LEED certification for buildings? Well, you have to purchase that seal. So that's a business model. But it's something that buildings want because it's good for the builder, the contractor, and for the building, and for the, say, hospital or, business that owns it. It's a good thing. Well, U.S. Healthful Food Council developed a LEED certification for food called REAL. REAL certified. And REAL as an acronym stands for Responsible Epicurean and Agricultural Leadership. And they've already gotten the entire state of Tennessee to participate, the Department of Health there, and there are 42 restaurants in the state of Tennessee that are REAL certified. So when you go into that restaurant, you know what you're being served. So REAL certification for restaurants, IRN was developing a REAL certification for food that you can buy at the grocery store. So that if you saw this seal, you'd know that whatever's in this package can't kill you. We're doing educational venues and efforts in various ways. We had a public television documentary that we had called Sweet Revenge, which people can, rent online or buy the DVD, and it will teach them exactly what's wrong with the food supply and how to reverse diabetes themselves. Reverse it, and I meant reverse it, not just treat it, but reverse it. Diabetes, type 2 diabetes, can be reversed if you catch it early enough. If you've had it for 10 years, it's a different story. But if you're relatively recent into type 2 diabetes, you can reverse it. But you can't reverse it until you fix your liver. And you can't fix your liver until you fix your food.
If you were the ruler for a day tomorrow, taking all of those things from highest to lowest, and you say it and it happens, what would be the order of things that you would tick off the list?
First thing I would do, get rid of food subsidies. There is not one food that requires a subsidy today. Food subsidies are holdover from the Dust Bowl and from the Depression, where we had a destitute population over here and we had the food manufacturing and growth over here. And the problem was you couldn't put corn on railroad cars and ship it, or flour for that matter. You had to basically process it, and you had to subsidize it to do it in order to feed a destitute population. And that made perfect sense through the Depression and through World War II. After that, this was a policy that should have basically expired. But people learned that they could make money at it, and so we doubled down. And then in 1971, with Richard Nixon basically wanting to make food cheap because he knew that fluctuating food prices caused political unrest, he told his agriculture secretary, Earl Butz, to go out to the heartland and get them to understand that we are going to make food cheap. And so he went there and he said 3 things: row to row, furrow to furrow, get bigger, get out. And so today we have monoculture. So we have all of the corn in Iowa and we have all the cattle in Kansas, and we have to spread petroleum products on the corn in order to make the corn grow, and we have to give antibiotics to the cattle in Kansas to keep them from dying from infectious disease. When they all lived on the farm together, we didn't have this problem. There is no food that requires a subsidy today. None. And the things that we subsidize are the things that kill us: corn, wheat, soy, and sugar. So if I had a magic wand, that's the first thing I would do. People say, well, that would make food prices go up. Actually, the Giannini Foundation at UC Berkeley modeled this in 2007. What would happen if we actually got rid of all food subsidies? And the answer is food prices wouldn't change, except for one item: sugar.
If that's number 1, can you round it out? Will you give me 2 more?
Sure. I would change the word type 2 diabetes. No one knows what it means. Diabetes is an Egyptian word, it's not a Latin word. It means siphon, because you're in the bathroom peeing your brains out. But no one knows what that means. I would change type 2 diabetes in all governmental materials and in medical textbooks, etc., to what it really is: processed food disease. Call it what it is. In addition, I would make hospitals get rid of soft drinks, as we have at UCSF. We have the Healthy Beverage Initiative, because hospitals are supposed to role model good behavior. Hospitals were the first places to ban smoking, so that people understood, this is actually healthy for you. So I would do that across the country. I would get rid of all sugared beverages into hospitals, and many other, shall we say, smaller things.
What's the worst case scenario if we continue on the path that we're on right now?
Well, Morgan Stanley answered that question for us. Last year, they published a report. You can find it online. It's called The Bittersweet Aftertaste of Sugar. It was in March of 2015. And they modeled what economic growth would look like in the United States based on a low sugar case and a high sugar case, which is what we have now. And on a low sugar case, they were able to see stability in economic growth at 2.9%. With the high sugar case, by the year 2035, we will reach 0.0% economic growth. That's the worst case. Right now, we have 412 million diabetics walking the planet. That is 7% of the world's population. And that will likely go up to 700 million by the year 2030 if we do nothing.
And in the scenario that you explained with public health care and
there won't be public health, there won't be health care, because Medicare will be broke by the year 2026 unless we turn chronic disease around. Think of it this way. The food industry grosses $1.46 trillion a year, of which 45% is gross profit. That's $657 billion a year in gross profit. But healthcare costs $3.2 trillion a year, of which 75% of that is chronic metabolic disease, of which 75% of that is preventable if we changed our diet. So 75% of 75% of 3.2 trillion, that's $1.8 trillion wasted down a rat hole. We lose triple what the food industry makes. That is unsustainable. Something has to give.
I can't end on a more perfect note. I want to respect your time and thank you so much for allowing us to talk to you.
My pleasure.